So the next panel is one I think is going to be interesting to a lot of the people who were exhibiting at the show, and that is a panel of importers and distributors. One of the people who was going to join us today, Mike Votto of Votto Wines, was unable to make it. He came back from Provine with a cold. But we have three other representatives, and gentlemen, if you would come up when I call you. First one is Scott Ades. Scott is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Winebow Group, which is an organization recently formed by the merger of Winebow, Inc. and the Vintner Group. Go ahead, sit at the end, yeah, okay. Since the merger, he's been responsible for the wholesale sales organization and distribution center operations of the Winebow Group. Their network extends, so when we think about Winebow, it's part an import company and part a distribution company. He's speaking here from the perspective of the distribution company, but they operate in, I think, 17 states? 19 states, okay. I didn't get the email on that, so okay. Next up is Giacomo Turone. Giacomo, if you would come join us. Giacomo is VP Portfolio Management for Palm Bay, one of the nation's top wine and spirits importers. He's part of the senior management team and is the point person managing relationships between suppliers and the internal operations, sales, and marketing, and it's, I would say, a challenging job. Fair enough? Okay. He's also a former founding partner of Punch and Judy Wine Bar in New York, so he really has a unique insider's view on what it takes to make things happen on premise. And then lastly, Jim Ryan. Come join us, Jim. Jim is Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Constellation's Beer Division. Jim's responsibilities include management of all federal, state, and local government, trade, and industry affairs. And he's the kind of guy who hangs around with Donna and solves all the world's problems. He's a beer industry veteran, and I found out a Wisconsin native, so good on you for that. Worked at some major, Anheuser-Busch, Pabst Brewing, Heilemann, which are big names if you're here from the US, and then ultimately Barton, which then became part of Constellation. He's on the board of the Beer Institute's Management Committee. He's also on the board of directors of NABI. Here's the bottom line, okay? In any meeting or conversation you're having, any meeting, there's a whole bunch of people in the room who can say no. Right? There's usually one person who can say yes. These are the guys whose job it is to say yes. They get a ton of calls. So what we're going to talk about here, chat in a conversation, is what is their reality about the kinds of things that are coming in cold on the web, on email, telephone calls, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to ask each of you, each one an individual question. If you'd like to comment on it, please chime in. And the first one, I think I'll start with Scott from a distribution point of view, and also because I was going to sit down, but that's okay. No, it's fine. How many calls a week do you get, and what kind of pitches do you get, and what would you rather hear than what you do hear when people are calling in?
Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. We get a lot of calls, requests. Actually, very often wine just shows up. People ship wine in, and we don't really actually know much about it. What we'd rather hear about is, or rather know, is what's behind that wine. What's the winery? Who are the people behind it? What is the story? And what is the expectations and goals of that winery? Those things are really important to us as we're evaluating what to take on and what not to take on.
But is it about, one of the things we heard yesterday was about the story, and Kendra's going to talk about storytelling and all that. But is your first point of interest, the way I like to say it is, when I pitch something to a retailer, their first question to me is, okay, if I'm going to put yours in, I got to take something out. And I know what the one that I'm going to take out is selling. How do I know what you're going to do? How do they convince you that they have a legitimate business opportunity for you?
Well, that varies based on what it is that they're presenting. If they're presenting an established wine in the market already, which does happen, then it's based on the facts, right? How is that wine already selling? Is it on premise? Has it been placed? Is it in the retail channel? What kind of volume does it have? You can't hide from those numbers, really. If it does not, and that's really where it gets a little bit more difficult, we're looking at things like press. The competitive position of the wine. Is it in a segment that is a growing segment? Is it in a segment that's extremely crowded right now? how is that wine priced? Is the wine priced effectively in the market? And what are the various things that you can do to change those factors if they're not going in the direction that you'd like them to go into right now?
Would either of you like to comment on that?
Sure.
I know you would.
As an importer, so we don't have a real active distribution arm in the United States, we have a pretty focused approach on the categories we work with. So we do not duplicate a lot producers from categories because we have a sales team that needs to go sell it to 50 states 50 times. I think it's been said today earlier. Part of the approach is dual. We certainly look at data. There are categories that are hot that we want to be in, that we're looking for products to cover those categories. There is also categories that are emerging, and we cannot be blind to the fact that something that exists today in 8 million case category didn't exist 20 years ago. So we need to plan for the future. And we do that very carefully. So data is something that we do look at, but the other aspect is very personal. We talk to the people behind the brands, become familiar with what they do, who they are, and start establishing what are the values of that brand. Is their unique point of difference, a selling pitch? Who are the individuals? Are they press-worthy? Can I bring those individuals to the market and meet the press? How's their English? Have they accomplished anything in their in their domestic markets? So that's typically a good indication for us. And it becomes a very collaborative effort of what can we get from that producer and what can we provide as far as expertise from our side.
Okay. Question for, go ahead if you want to comment on that.
Steve, I was just going to say, first, I was here yesterday, and obviously the audience and the exhibitors, much more wine and spirits than beer. I'm obviously a beer guy with Constellation, but you probably heard this, so everybody knows that it takes a lot of great beer to make great wine and great spirits. So I feel I have some relevance here with everybody. I would just like to say, and again, this perspective is coming from, but I think it is germane to the entire industry, but coming from a beer perspective. And we started I've had the opportunity with Constellation as a very small company. We're a brewer and an importer in our position on the beer side. We started as a very small company. We've grown into a much larger company. We're the third largest beer company now. But one of the filters that we look at is with brands and companies that approach us, and there's nothing wrong. Talking about margin and money is not a dirty word. We want it to be good, obviously, for the brand owner. If we are representing a brand in an agency relationship, what the margin is, the money that we're making together. Also, relative to growth. We don't look for, as we've evolved, we don't look for growth that is, we have to have big growth immediately. But we do want to sit down and see what's going to happen over a 3 to 5 year period. So we do have a horizon to look at that we think is fair, and I think John Bodette mentioned that this morning in his presentation. So we look at that. We look at high-end premium segment. The way the industry is going in the United States, certainly in the beer industry, and I think across all segments, is to the high end. Much more, it's going to continue to grow. So we certainly want to look for brands and partners that want to play and participate in that area. Another area is white space. So we have a portfolio of brands that we've worked hard to build over the years. So somebody approaches us with a portfolio of brands or one brand. Is that brand going to complement our portfolio? Is it something that is going to fill a void that we don't have, that our distributors don't have, and the retailers? So that is important to us. Ease of execution. When we bring in a partner, how difficult is it going to, or challenges are we going to face with? Shipping the product around the United States, bringing in the product from Europe or South America relative to warehousing and getting it to our distributors. And last but not least, certainly is is the investment in people, the investment in your brands. You're the brand owner, so you have to have a reasonable investment behind that brand. But also, again, I reference what I heard this morning. It takes marketing and it takes feet on the street. It takes people. So we look at all those different areas when we sit down to talk, to speak with someone about moving forward, establishing a relationship, and going forward. We feel that those areas are extremely important.
Okay. A fundamental question. We've got two people whose business is based on what we call the agency model. Generally speaking, they don't own the brands, but they work collaboratively with the brand producers. Constellation, certainly on the wine side, I don't know about the beer side, tends to own. You don't do much agency work. Is that true?
We own right now, but we've done agency work for years.
How has that changed? How is that dynamics changing? You guys, that's what you're doing. Diageo got out of the wine business. Some company, the whole Cuervo deal was a fundamental issue about agency brands. Can you guys comment on that?
Well, I can quickly, on the beer side, from my experience, as we started, when I started with the company, we were all agency. We represented, our flagship brand is Corona from Mexico. So we have the Corona portfolio from Mexico. We were we had an agency relationship with Modelo. We represented brands from Germany. We represented brands from China. As we continue to, and we're all about growing brands, and we want to be able to grow brands as the brand owners, us, that were selling to us. One of the things they looked at, yes, we want to grow the brands. We want to grow the brands faster than the segment is growing. Very goal-oriented. We've been that way since the early days that I have been involved. We had the opportunity to go from an agency to acquiring. So we acquired the Modelo brands for the United States. And as that model kind of transformed our company, it became more complex. Our company got bigger. And some of the agency relationships just didn't work any longer. So in all fairness, just like it is as the brand owner coming to that partnership again, is we decided to terminate some relationships, and it was better for the brand owners where we had agency relationships, and for ourselves also. So I think it's, in all fairness, we are all about, and I've heard it all day, as far as partnerships. It's got to be fair for both sides. We certainly are looking for the next great opportunity, but it's not like we want to gather as many brands as we can and put it in our portfolio. We want brands that can grow. We want the brand owners to be successful, because that's what's made the overall industry across beer, wine, and spirits successful. And as a industry leader in the beer side, we want to see that for the entire industry to continue to grow that way.
Okay, Giacomo, Scott, you want to comment on that?
For us, the relationship between agency brands and own brands is changing a little bit, especially over the past 5 years. There needs to be a balance in our minds. We have started developing some of our own brands in both wine and now in spirits, but we're not doing it at the expense of the brand owners that we have partnered with for so many years. So it's about filling voids that we may not be able to fill properly with the right partners, and defining a little bit of our own destiny. It's true that we have long-term partnerships, but they're partnerships, and we believe in our suppliers, they believe in us, but having a little bit more of invested interest in our own brand is important to us right now.
Scott?
Yeah, I would echo those comments. I'd say we approach it similarly. I also think that it's really important to understand that to be an owned brand, where you are representing your own brand in the market, you either have to be the size of Constellation or a large enough organization that you can bear the expense. So one that recently just happened is Santa Margarita, which everybody probably knows, went from being represented by a third-party importer to being represented by themselves. They have a very large business that gives them the scale to do that. Without scale like that, it's a very expensive proposition to be representing your own brand in the United States.
So what's the opportunity for a lot of these guys? They want to come into the U.S., so they're limited. The agency brand model is not as common or popular, or how should they be presenting themselves to you in terms of positioning the contractual relationship, the concept of it. Yeah.
Well, I think that the primary thing is finding the right partner. And with the right partner, I mean somebody that speaks the same language. It's your objectives, your targets in the market, the way you go to market in your domestic market, your accounts, your types of products need to be aligned with the importer you talk to. It's not about size necessarily. It's not about somebody's a large importer like ourselves can be a good fit for everybody at the end of the day. And there needs to be a common understanding of how is the sales structure, what's the organization like, does the importer and the producer understand each other on what the objectives are, and are they executable given what's already on an importer's plate, or a wholesaler plate for that matter. It's a pie. We all have priorities, a lot of things that we're working on, and how much room is there in that workload to add a brand? What are the expected results? What is the relevance of that brand in the portfolio? So for example, in an organization like us, a little brand is not going to get a lot of time. As great as the wines are, as great as the story is, as great as the people are, there needs to be time to be dedicating to that brand. The brand won't just sell itself because it happened to be in the portfolio. We need to go sell it 50 times in 50 states. And then that's just the beginning. I don't know who said that this morning, but it's true. That needs to be sold to the trade. So what is the relevance of that brand in the portfolio? Is it a unique entry? Does it represent a future opportunity? Or is it real immediate need? So finding the right partner that can relate to the needs of that producer and has the right execution strategy to bring that brand to market is the first and most important thing.
What I particularly comment on there is, it sounds to me like you need somebody to come to you with a business proposition and answers the question, what's in it for me? I'm sure your grandfather made wonderful wine, but how are we going to make money together?
That's certainly a very relevant aspect. Yeah, partnerships are great, and we're in a great business where we have the opportunity to spend time with great people all over the world. But at the end of the day, it needs to make sense for us financially as an importer, and maybe most importantly for the wholesaler. Because at the end of the day, the brand will be built by the importer together with a producer partner. The wholesaler is a great vehicle to the market, but they're not going to build the brand. They're going to dedicate some time to us. We're going to have to force it. We're going to have to invest money. But the brand is built by an importer with their supplier partner.
So raising the issue about distributors, the news for many of you, I think most everybody in this room knows this, but most recently there was some major consolidation. 4 of the top 10 wholesalers in the United States merged, so much smaller setup. What does that mean for smaller brands? What does that mean for the smaller wholesalers? Where are the opportunities in the market if the big guys are getting bigger and they're paying attention to the big brands? What about everybody else? Please.
It's not really very good news for smaller brands. The bigger you are as a wholesaler, the harder it is to pay attention to something small, as we were just talking about. There's got to be a financial reason to direct very significant resources to supporting the brand. It's very good news for the smaller wholesalers, and most wholesalers, almost actually all wholesalers, are significantly smaller than those wholesalers that came together. So that really is the rest of the market. Because anything that is not of significant size is not important to the larger wholesalers, which creates more opportunity for the smaller wholesalers at the end of the day.
I would agree. On the beer side, the consolidation amongst beer distributors is size-wise is probably not as massive as what has happened recently on the wine and spirit side, but we have a fair share of fair amount of consolidation. The big are just they're getting bigger, and we have 7 brands. I mean, we have a small portfolio on the beer side, which is good. 7 brands versus, so we're in a house, a distributor that has, let's say, Anheuser-Busch products. They probably have 110 brands, plus craft brewers and whatever else they have in there. So sometimes even with one of our small seventh brand, it's tough getting, the time and the attention and the dedication that we believe that those brands require based on opportunity. But I would say also that with this craft movement and with all the innovation, everybody talks, every presentation, you hear innovation, innovation, innovation. And there is, we see it downstairs. I mean, there are so many new and great products. I think these smaller distributors have, is a great access to the marketplace for smaller brands. They say on the beer side, when all the craft brewers were opening, that we could never support all these beers in the marketplace. The retailers couldn't support it. So we have over 4,000, there's more breweries in the United States now than any time in the history of the country. There's 4,300 breweries. As we've been sitting here today, a brewery has opened somewhere in the country. They're opening almost 2 a day. So, and they're all finding space. Some of them self-distribute. Some go through these specialty distributors, and the big distributors, the big beer distributors, are setting up separate specialty operations. So I believe that that opportunity, again, exists across all the segments. So again, you have to have a quality product, you have to have a plan, but I would not be discouraged. Distribution is a challenge, but I wouldn't be discouraged if you can bring a good plan, a good product, passion and commitment. I think there's a place in the marketplace for you.
I think we all agree. The other thing that's going to happen, I agree with both of you, that there is going to be, that's going to create opportunities for smaller distributors for sure. The other thing that I think is going to happen is that the larger distributor are going to have to go back to segmenting their sales forces. They cannot manage 18,000 SKUs or 22,000 SKUs as they merge with 2 sales forces. It's going to be more difficult for them, so they're going to merge to create efficiencies, and at the same time they're going to recreate the specialization in the sales forces. How fast that's going to happen, that's all to be seen. It's an investment, of course, but I think that we'll see some things happen pretty quickly in the major market.
So it's great. You're the guys who can say yes. There's a bunch of people out there who would absolutely love to talk to you. How do they get through the firewalls you put up, because you do get just hammered by all these calls? I know you guys go to Provine and Vinylima Expo and you see all of this stuff too, and then all of the diversity that we've had here. You can't take everybody's call. How can you be democratic here? Or can you be?
Persistence.
And creativity, wouldn't you add that?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I'll use a non-wine example. We were looking at moving to a new office building, and we had turned this person down over and over and over again, a broker, and he sent me a bottle with nuts in it with a note that said, "You may think I'm nuts, but you really should see my building." So I called him back. You know, lots of different creative things get you in the door, almost with any business at the end of the day. But I do think, you know, persistence is key, because you are going to get the door closed on you a lot. Unless the other great opportunity is get great press, which everyone would love to do, and it's not so easy to do. But if you get great press, that will help open the door much more quickly.
One point, if I can chime in, is that I made the point earlier about you need to prove yourself a commercial success before you can become a commercial success. So starting small in a small market where you can generate some numbers. And then the point about trade media, then you have to tell somebody about it, so that when you do call, you just read about it in Mark Brown's Industry News Update, now you'll take that call. That kind of creativity. You were going to say something, Jim?
I would wholeheartedly concur that you have to be tenacious and keep going back and going back. I also think another opportunity, at least, again, from personal experience, is events like this. Distributors have conferences, brewers have conferences. I'm sure wine and spirits wholesalers, our National Beer Wholesalers Association. If you can get into events like that, either to display product, pour product, sample product, that is an opportunity face-to-face. It's going to be tough to pick up the phone and call somebody and get that call back, just because we get so many of those calls. But if you can get face-to-face and opportunities, events like this provide a great opportunity to do that. So I would certainly, from my perspective, encourage everyone to look for these kind of events to take advantage of.
One thing I see a lot is, people come to me and say, hey, can you help me find an importer in the US? And the reality is, we were talking about this earlier, that even if you found an importer, that's not the end. That's just the very beginning. You need a sales solution, distribution solution, marketing solution. And more often than not, we've been talking about feet on the street. To be clear, we're talking about brand ambassadors, which individually are a very expensive proposition and not necessarily a scalable thing. How does somebody bridge the gap there by saying, okay, we recognize we need to do the job of building the brand ourselves. I can't afford to put 10 people in the street. How do they deal with that?
And I wouldn't recommend it. I think brand ambassadors get spread out too thin very quickly, and it is a very big expense. It's about where we put the money. Instead of spending the money you need to spend on a brand ambassador, and about half that spend could be on planes and hotels, probably not the best way to spend money. It's about creating a proposition for the entire three-tier system to have a viable brand that can be grown, that can be scaled, that offers unique point of difference. And it's a lot better to invest the money in the individuals that are really representing the brand, rather than a brand ambassador that can be a very good salesperson. But the presence of a brand owner, a winemaker, the founder, gets a lot more attention in the marketplace.
Go ahead.
I would also say it's very, very important to think about your business model before you go to market, and particularly about your price. Because if you start with a price that is too low, you can never go up. Something very important to note, you can never raise your price unless you really want to reduce your volume. But starting with the right price that gives you the money to fund what is being talked about here. And I would have to agree with it. At a certain level, a brand ambassador is great when there's enough scale, but that takes a long time to build, and it is an extremely expensive proposition. So if you start at the right price, that allows you to have enough profit to invest in the brand in the ways that your importer and distributor need you to do. You don't have to go that extra mile of the brand ambassador. And something to think about in that is, when people think about the supply chain, they say, wow, I give this big chunk to my importer and this big chunk to my distributor, and then I get this. And the reality is, even though they seem like big chunks, those two tiers, especially the distribution tier, do not actually make a very big margin on the bottom line, because bringing the wine to market is extremely expensive. And so making sure you have the right price, therefore you have enough money built into your proposition. And you can always use that money to incentive and to roll your price back a little bit at a time, as opposed to starting low and being stuck with where you are.
I'd also like to add to, and I wholeheartedly concur, is the fact that you have to be very focused and relative to your approach at retail. You know, you can't just look at, you go into, I'm headquartered in Chicago, so we have like 12,000 accounts. So you think we'll have somebody talk to us and say, geez, if we could sell, one case a week in each one of those accounts, we could think of all that volume we could do, and all the money you could make and the money we could make. Now that's, I'm obviously being facetious, but we've had conversations in the past like that. It doesn't work that way anymore. It has to be so strategic, so focused. But if you can identify the right accounts where you can get sampling, because we have a small brand we're doing that with right now, high-profile accounts on premise for the beer product, and it becomes sales and momentum marketing. As we get into one account, we build some velocity. We go to the next account. We may only have 50 accounts doing it, but we have had, that is one way to, to build certainly from the ground up when you're starting something brand new or very small volume.
That leads to a very interesting question. I heard somebody say, Laura Crystal may be here. These new emerging delivery within an hour services, minibar delivery is theirs, drink, drizzly, thirsty, saucy, there's a whole bunch of them. Seems to be consolidating and so forth, but what about the dynamics of that, and how does that kind of change or challenge the standard infrastructure, if you will, of how the industry functions?
I think it's still really yet to be played out because they're just coming together. There are some services that are fairly straightforward, which are we will deliver whatever you buy to you. They're basically a delivery service.
Sherry Lehman's done that for
Right, exactly. They're no different. The application-based ones like a Drizzly are a very different model. If anyone has not downloaded Drizzly while you're here, you should and just take a look at it. Drizzly is based on advertising, essentially. When you pull up the application, it gives you can choose from these wines. So if you are a brand new winery and you're trying to get into a market, they're not really helping your cause at all because as a new item in the market or a small item in the market, you're not going to end up on that screen. And that, for small brands, can be a very challenging aspect of the market. If you're a large brand and you can afford to invest and advertise on those applications, it can help you do quite well.
Are you guys are your marketing people focusing any programs on that, or are you still in the process of kind of developing, evaluating, and understanding how it works?
We're evaluating.
We're talking to them, and yes, I don't think it's going to be a major change. It's about the consumer, more about the consumer than changing the structure of the market from my perspective, and it's going to add a layer. It is adding a layer for the consumer to choose product. One of the aspects is that no retailer really needs any more product. No retailer has really room on their shelves. You haven't walked into a retailer, it's like, you have a lot of space there, so why don't I ship you 10 or 20 new things? Yeah. And the consumer is having a bit of a hard time finding what they want, and online is a very easy way to find them. Because if you punch in a name, you'll find somebody that may be able to sell it to you, and you don't have to go look for it in 10 or 20 stores. In a major city may not be life-changing, but when you're in the Midwest and you got to drive 50 miles to go to a good retailer, it's a lot more convenient to get a box show up at your doorstep. So
I'm sorry.
Great thing for the consumer.
It raises a parallel conversation about the importance of e-commerce, and that with the expansion of SKUs that are out there and the physical limitations of individual stores, e-commerce, logically you would say, is perfectly set up because the cost of inventory is relatively small. It's still inventory and in and out charges and whatever, but you can have more selection. A lot of some companies and some organizations are doing things called like inventory on demand. They don't actually carry the product, but as long as it's listed in the state, they can go ahead and sell it. You guys want to comment on the importance of e-commerce and where it fits, especially for the new brands that are coming to the U.S.? Is it a tool that they can use, and if so, how?
Yeah, definitely. We have developed a lot of sales through e-commerce exclusively in some cases. It's sometimes easier to go to a buyer for a website, and there are websites that can sell 300 to 400 cases of any specific wine at $50 plus a bottle in 3 hours. Well, you wouldn't get to a wholesaler to buy that type of volume on that specific wine because they have 120,000, 150,000 active consumers that are going on the site and buying products that are unique and different. So of course you're not going to sell big brands on that e-commerce, even if wine.com does it. But there is a lot of e-commerce sites that are based on unknown brands where they can tell the story just like we do. Mm-hmm. And you don't have a salesperson, so it needs to be well told. But there's a lot of consumers that want to go on that site, read the story, and try the wine because there is a lot of interest in trying new things. It's on the consumer side.
Just to that point, Danny makes a point in his presentations that wine.com, which is one of the larger e-commerce players, 53% of their business is imported wine. I'm sorry, we're kind of on wine, but I'm going to ask you about this consolidation thing too. 53% is imported product. The actual penetration in markets like 23, 24%. So you've got this kind of different audience for these different channels that I think is significant, and that's kind of segmenting based on how they want to buy. So that changes how you influence them because you're no longer relying on your salesman or particularly the salesperson in the store if they're not going into the store. So a question for you. InBev, all these big companies. It's just more and more and more. And then you got all the craft beers down here, and everybody's fighting. What's happening to the big guys?
Well, hopefully we're beating them up, but
Do you consider Corona a craft beer?
no. We don't. We consider ourselves, though. We talk of ourselves as the high-end premium player in the market. So we're competing. We are competing with the Buds and Millers of the world, but. Again, what I said earlier, who are the brands that are losing out there on the beer side are popular price brands. That's why the Anheuser-Busch's, the Miller Coors, they're all trying to evolve and grow their craft beer segment, high-end brands. For example, Anheuser-Busch InBev has Stella, they have Beck's, Miller Coors, you think of brands like Peroni, Pilsner, Urquell. So those are the they're putting a lot of emphasis in those areas. We're fortunate in our area, again, when you define the market, and I would say the same thing, brands that we would look at, does it open our company up to new consumers and new demographics? Obviously, with the Modelo, with the Corona portfolio, the Hispanic community is very important to us. We built our brand in that area. So we look at that when we think about new brands, when we talk to suppliers. So there seems to be, as I go back and talk about space and opportunities, again, that craft beer growth, just think of all the SKUs if we're opening, 2 small breweries a day. But it's the high-end area that there are winners and losers, but it's the high-end area in our segment, in the beer segment, that's certainly growing, and I think it is across, wine and spirits also. So that's where our focus is.
Good, thank you. I'd like to open it up for some questions. We got some time here. These are the guys who kind of control the industry or kind of define it. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually have 2 questions. You've mentioned a lot about the fact that you like to look at the producer and see what the press tells about them. I meet a lot of producers. Usually they don't have distribution in the US, so they can't get ratings in One Spectator or One Enthusiast. And so it's hard for them to have a press coverage at this stage, but do you use and value ratings they could get in France or in Italy or in Spain? So that was my first question. And my second question was more on the distribution. I was under the impression that brand ambassador were actually a good tool to support the sales for distributor, but you seem to say that maybe it's another way to work things. What is actually the distributor looking for from the importers or from the brands to get support, to be more visible in the portfolio? Because I feel that the distribution is really the key to sell into the retail, but how do we help the distributor? And I think a lot of producers don't really understand and they don't really know what to do.
I couldn't summarize the question, but go ahead and answer it.
So international press is fine for our perspective. Of course, it's not going to give us sales in the market for the most part. We deal 60% of our business, 65 is still Italy. We rely a lot on Gambaro Rosso as a good source of press. I will tell you, there is nobody who's buying wine because a wine gets Trebichere from Gambaro Rosso. Maybe a couple, but you're not going to build a business on that. But it's a good indication that there is someone behind the brand, the winery, that knows how to work the press. And if the English is good enough, we can probably replicate that in the US with the US press. So yes, local press is viable for us to at least make an initial evaluation. Brand ambassador is a very complex topic for me, and Scott and I are not exactly seeing it the same way, and I can tell you that us as a team in-house, we don't all see it the same way. I think you make a good point. When you have a brand as established, adding that level of contact is positive. I think that when you're starting off and the volume is not yet there, I don't think it makes a big difference. I don't think that having an ambassador travel 50 states and go out and spend how many days a month on the road, if that can be long-term also, it's a taxing job, is a good way to start. Higher level individuals behind the brand are more relevant. And we do have a number of brand ambassadors that work for the brands. The other aspect to be more localized brand ambassadors, and on the spirits, that's more of a practice. You want people that are in the industry and know the bartenders and so forth, and they don't spend time traveling from New York to California back and forth several times during a year. So that's my take on the brand ambassador.
Yeah, Matt, I actually would agree with most, if not all of that. I think the issue about the brand ambassador really at the core is the cost of it. That person plus the expenses of traveling the country or doing whatever is going to be $150,000 probably, maybe more, especially if you want someone who's going to do a good job. That's a relatively large expense that could be spent elsewhere for a smaller brand. From a distributor standpoint, sending someone from the winery, let's say, who maybe comes to New York for a few months and actually works with the team and works the market, that can be helpful, except that person needs to be taken everywhere because they're not familiar with the market. They don't need the customers, and that is a big drag on the organization. So it is a tough challenge, but I really think it's the cost and having the scale of the brand that warrants it. From how to get the distributor's attention then, that is the challenge. I think that is a well-recognized challenge, and I think really the key there is having a good importer that actually works well with its distribution partners, and that importer has a team of people that are working with the distribution partners, because they become the brand ambassador, which is what you want. But then at the end of the day, the business is very complicated until you get down to the last point, which is the salesperson who's out there in the market selling the wine. And the salesperson gets engaged in a product that is going to make them money, because that's why they're selling the wine. They love the wine, but they also have a mortgage and they need to pay the bills. So they're looking for, obviously, a good quality product, whether it's a wine, a spirit, or a beer. They want it to be a good quality product. It needs to be in a very good package, which didn't get a lot of discussion, but most people are making an uneducated purchase. And the thing that attracts them, if they're not handed something by someone, is the package. And the package has a lot to do with the choices that people make. So good product, good package, and a good story. They love to tell stories, especially if you're selling wine, and actually craft spirits now are all about the stories. So if you have a good product, a good package, and a good story, you will probably have a better chance of engaging the salespeople. The last thing is value, and I would say that value, which translates to price, you need to have good value. I actually want to restate what I said. You need a great product, a great package, and a great story. And if you have those things, you can have good value. You don't need to be the lowest priced product because there's a story to tell. If you don't have those three things, then your price plays a much bigger role in what it is that you're trying to sell.
Just one thing that I would add is something we did with beer, and that's why we had people on the street selling Corona, is we hired a promotional agency to help us in New York City and in San Francisco. It did cost money, but to take one of our salespersons that could go out and sell a 200-case display of Corona or sell a 5-case display of a Chinese beer called Qingdao, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to gravitate towards the big display. So we hired an agency to help us in those two key markets. That was a big, obviously, high profile, lots of volume, and then we eventually took it from the agency, but we paid them. They went out and worked with our distributor, and we had very targeted accounts, and we had success. We had success with that. We focused on the on-premise where we would get consumer sampling. So just an option.
Okay. Another question? Go ahead.
Would you agree with the saying of craft as the new luxury on the high end or premium market in spirits, wine, beer? Do you think that's an ongoing trend? How long will it go? How do you see it?
I think that craft is of interest because consumers, we are all consumers, we're getting more involved in what we buy. We want to know more about it. And we want to have the aspect of saying, I discovered this, and craft provides that opportunity. If you buy what we define a craft product today, you're probably going to talk to your friends on social media or wherever else about the fact that you just discovered this great product, and you want to share it. You want to talk about it and the fact that there is an individual behind it, where it's made, how it's made, and why is it different. A new luxury, I'm not sure. I think it's more about an everyday thing. Craft doesn't necessarily need to be a luxury in terms of price. It just defines the fact that rather than marketing behind a product, there is more of probably a person, a place, a sense of what the message is behind that product. But I think it's here to stay.
That raises another question about influencers. And one of the things we all know from social media is the most important thing that influences a sale is the word of mouth from somebody else, and social media has been like the engine that's empowered that. How has that changed the influence of both the critics at publications, independent critics, and then other influencers, whether they are bloggers, writers, active Facebook people, and so forth, in either of your industries?
I think the biggest change is that over the last 10 years, scores have become exceedingly important. And if you get a great score, your wine will sell. And then the next year, your wine might not sell if you don't get the same score. And what's really horrible is if you get a 90 or a 91 this year and you get an 89 next year, it will have a big impact on your volume. So there is a tremendous amount of information out in the blogosphere, and I think the younger the drinker, the more they are in tune with that, and that over time that will continue to build. And they actually tend to not love scores, but the vast majority of the wine buying community today is still driven by scores, and that's a challenge, really.
We've seen that in the research, that younger people are less interested in scores. They're more interested in what their peers say than what a pundit says, I think is kind of a way to think about it. So that becomes an opportunity for people to say, okay, I'm not going to go down the traditional route, trying to get a wine spectator score. The old joke was, if you got over 90, you can't buy it. If you got under 90, you can't sell it, right? You're dead in the water, whatever you do with the score thing. But the stories is what drives it. That's what's word of mouth, and that's what the internet and all of these tools, social media and everything else, I think that's what empowers everybody here to compete on a scale where you're not determined, which is not determined by the budget that you have for advertising. I used to work on a big brand, and that was it, right? We had this huge brand budget. I controlled the message. Not true. Now somebody else controls the message. You have the opportunity to influence and shape it, and that's where the real opportunity lies. One last question.
Yep. Yep.
Go ahead, I can't see. So.
We're a startup brand called Wild Tiger Rum from India, and we're entering the States very soon. And Scott, as you said, we've got all the key ingredients, cracking liquid, fantastic packaging, and an authentic story. But we're a brand from an emerging economy, and we're fighting what we call the provenance paradox. So what does a brand from an emerging economy need to do differently in order to compete with the reputed brands already here and achieve similar price points?
I think there, someone once used a saying that I use. They were so far out in front of the parade, nobody knew there was a parade. And I think there's a lot of that in the wine industry. And to some extent, the market needs to be ready for the product that you're bringing, and that takes a lot of work, actually. Changing the mindset of the wine buying community. Did you say from India? Is that? Yeah. Most people do not think about wine from India.
It's actually it's a rum.
Oh, it's a rum. Oh, I thought it was a wine. Okay, rum. Well, that actually is a completely different story. And a very different dynamic. There, I think it is about selling the uniqueness of that story, and people are willing to try that. It's really making sure that your story is very clear, very concise, and articulated very, very well. And if you have those three things, we see a lot of spirits that develop very, very quickly and very, very well if they have those things together. You know, and the one thing I mentioned this earlier on the spirit side now, especially because there's far less consistency, is that bottle. Your bottle needs to represent what you are trying to sell out there. It's inordinately critical.
Okay. I'll take one more. Go ahead.
I just want to ask, what would be your suggested alternative to the brand ambassador investment? Like, let's say I do have a small family winery and we have the money that we're willing to invest to take a market seriously like Florida or California. What would you suggest? Would it be a winemaker in the market for a few months at a time, or what would that be?
Yeah, and Scott quoted the right cost, and you said or more, and when you put it all in, it's easily more. So when you think about that cost, definitely, I'd much rather see at the beginning individuals from the brand coming into the market and spending time in the market. And in too many cases, it's also, oh, I'm on the way to Japan, so I'll just land in New York and spend 30 minutes there. Can you get me a meeting? That's not going to work. You want to individuals that are more tightly connected to the brand, that are part of the founding team, the winemaking team, distiller, if it's a spirit, brewmaster, if it's a beer, that can speak to the brand from their heart. An ambassador, at the end of the day, I'm an ambassador because I'll speak of our brands as if they were mine. But I didn't start it. I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations of a winery, of any of the spirits companies that we represent. So yes, that's what I would put the money. Considering that's a pretty good amount of money, and you can do a lot of trips to the United States with that.
Okay, so we're going to break for lunch. We're going to reconvene at 1:15. And a good segue here is everybody was talking about the importance of storytelling. Kendra Hall is going to come up, and that's her field of expertise. And we think that's a real opportunity for individualizing your programs. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much.